Welcome to the Folktale Project. This is Dan Scholz. This week we're reading from a new book, Redcap Tales by Samuel Rutherford Crockett. And it's an interesting collection in that it's really him telling versions of Sir Walter Scott's stories. The first of which is the story of Waverley, where we're going to pick up today with Chapter 2, The Enchanted Castle. Edward Waverley found his regiment quartered at Dundee in Scotland, but, the time being winter and the people of the neighbourhood not very fond of the Red soldiers, he did not enjoy the soldiering life so much as he had expected. So, as soon as the summer was fairly come, he asked permission to visit the Castle of Bradwardine, in order to pay his respects to his uncle's friend. It was noon of the second day after setting out when Edward Waverley arrived at the village of Tullyveolan, to which he was bound. Never before had he seen such a place, for, at his uncle's house of Waverley Honour, the houses of villagers, all white and neat, stood about a village green, or lurked ancient and ivy-grown under the shade of great old park trees. But the turf-roofed hovels of Tullyveolan, with their low doors supported on either side by all too intimate piles of peat and rubbish, appeared to the young Englishman hardly fit for human beings to live in. Indeed, from the hordes of wretched curs which barked after the heels of his horse, Edward might have supposed them meant to serve as kennels, that is, save for the ragged urchins who sprawled in the mud of the road and the old women who, distaff in hand, dashed out to rescue them from being trampled upon by Edward's charger. Passing gardens as full of nettles as of pot-herbs, and entering between a couple of gate-posts, each crowned by the image of a rampant bear, the young soldier at last saw before him at the end of an avenue the steep roofs and crow-steeped gable ends of Bradwardine, half dwelling-house, half castle. Here Waverley dismounted, and giving his horse to the soldier-servant who had accompanied him, he entered a court in which no sound was to be heard save the splashing of a fountain. He saw the door of a tall old mansion before him. Going up, he raised the knocker, and instantly the echoes resounded through the empty house, but no one came to answer. The castle appeared uninhabited, the court a desert. Edward glanced about him, half expecting to be hailed by some ogre or giant as adventurers used to be in the fairy tales he had read in childhood. But instead, he only saw all sorts of bears, big and little, climbing as it seemed on the roof, over the windows and out upon the ends of the gables, while over the door at which he had been vainly knocking he read in antique lettering the motto, "Beware the bear." But all these ruins were of stone, and each one of them kept as still and silent as did everything else about this strange mansion, except, that is, the fountain, which behind him in the court kept up its noisy splashing. Feeling somehow vaguely uncomfortable, Edward Waverley crossed the court into a garden, green and pleasant, but to the full as solitary as the castle court. Here again he found more bears, all sitting up in rows on their haunches on parapets and along terraces as if engaged in looking at the view. He wandered up and down, searching for someone to whom to speak, and had almost made up his mind they had found a real enchanted castle of silence, when, in the distance, he saw a figure approaching up one of the green walks. There was something uncouth and strange about the way the newcomer kept waving his hands over his head. Then, for no apparent reason, flapping them across his breast like a groom on a frosty day, hopping all the time, first on one foot and then on the other. Tiring of this way of getting over the ground, he would advance by standing leaps, keeping both feet together. The only thing he seemed quite incapable of doing was to use his feet one after the other as ordinary people do when they are walking. Indeed, this strange guardian of the enchanted castle of Bradwardine looked like a gnome or a fairy dwarf, for he was clad in an old-fashioned dress of grey, slashed with scarlet. On his legs were scarlet stockings, and on his head a scarlet cap, which in turn was surmounted with a turkey's feather. He came along, dancing and singing in jerks and snatches, till suddenly, looking up from the ground, he saw Edward. In an instant his red cap was off, and he was bowing and saluting and again saluting and bowing, with, if possible, still more extravagant gestures than before. Edward asked this curious creature if the Baron Bradwardine were at home, and what was his astonishment to be instantly answered in rhyme. The knights to the mountain his bugle to wind, the ladies to greenwood her garlands to bind, the bower of Bird Ellen heard moss on the floor, that the step of Lord William be silent and sure. This was impressive enough, surely, but after all it did not tell the young captain what he wanted to know. So he continued to question the strange wight, and finally, after eliciting many unintelligible sounds, was able to make out the single word, butler. Pouncing upon this, Edward commanded the unknown to lead him instantly to the butler. Nothing loath, the fool danced and capered on in front, and at a turning of the path they found an old man, who seemed by his dress to be half butler, half gardener, digging diligently among the flower-beds. Upon seeing Captain Waverley, he let drop his spade, undid his green apron, frowning all the time at Edward's guide for bringing his master's guest upon him without warning, to find him digging in the earth like a common labourer. But the Bradwardine butler had an explanation ready. His honour was with the folk, getting down the black hag, so he confided to Edward. The 2 gardener lads had been ordered to attend his honour, so, in order to amuse himself, he, the major domo of Bradwardine, had been amusing himself with dressing Miss Rose's flower-beds. It was but seldom that he found time for such like, though personally he was very fond of garden work. "He cannot get it wrought in more than 2 days a week, at no rate whatever," put in the scarecrow in the red cap and the turkey feather. "Go instantly and find his honour at the Black Hag," cried the major domo of Bradwardine, wrathful at his interference, "and tell him there's a gentleman come from England waiting for him in the hall." "Can this poor fellow deliver a letter?" Edward asked doubtfully. "With all fidelity, sir," said the butler. "That is, to anyone whom he respects. After all, he is more knave than fool. We call the innocent Davy Doolittle, though his proper name is Davy Gellatley. But the truth is that since my young mistress, Miss Rose Bradwardine, took a fancy to dress him up in fine clothes, the creature cannot be got to do a single hand's turn of work. But here comes Miss Rose herself. Glad will she be to welcome one of the name of Waverley to her father's house." And that is chapter 2 of this retelling of Waverley. And like I said, this is a very interesting book that we've dug into by Samuel Crockett, and it is going to continue with another tale of Waverley on Monday. This is Dan Scholz for the Folktale Project. Don't forget that you can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, Overcast, anywhere you'd like to get your podcasts. You can follow us on Twitter at Folktale Project. You can find us on Auto Radio, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, Spotify, anywhere you'd like to listen. And you can always head over to folktaleproject.com, where you'll find a new story waiting for you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. As always, thank you so much for listening.